Hello everyone, welcome to IoT Asia. Now we are coming to the very exciting topics on what is a green and how do we achieve a sustainable and green building of the future. All right, we all know that IoT is about digitalization. So that was the message 5 years ago. But today, digitalization by itself could be meaningless if it hasn't come with the sustainabilities in it as well. So IoT is in building, sustainability and green is in building. So today we are looking at the conversion of these two very important topics. And we have here with us a few very incredible speakers that can share with us some insight into this. So let's begin, all right? For myself, I'm Jonathan. I'm the Administrative Director of Unibis. So I will be your moderator. All right, and together with me, we have three good speakers. Okay, the first one is Kabi. All right, so Kabi, you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kabi. I lead the asset services team here in Arab, which is pretty much focusing on existing buildings, looking at reshaping how we manage and reuse the existing assets.
Thank you, Kabi. So second, can we have Fariza?
Hi, everyone. I'm the Vice President for Singapore Institute of Building Limited. My role is actually to look after the sustainability automation side under the Trade Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, can I have for Kenneth?
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kenneth, and I'm the founder and CEO of Green Concepts. We are a software company that provides a suite of IoT applications that help to drive sustainability in the built environment.
Thank you. So you see, we have three different speakers from three different fields. One is in the consultant field, one is a association which represent the end user, and lastly, we have Kenneth from the technology and vendor space. So three different perspectives. So I think that will make for a very good, interesting discussion. All right, so we shall ask ourselves a series of questions. The first one is, if you're here, you might ask, then what then exactly is a sustainable and green building? What is it then? And you ask then, why do we need it? What is the driving objective for doing all these things? And lastly, we ask ourselves then, how does IoT help us achieve all these objectives for a green and sustainable building? So starting off this, can we then ask our consultant, all right, to answer this? Kabi, thank you.
Yep, thanks, Jonathan. I think it's a very good question to set the context for our discussions today. So I suppose we really need to understand when we start talking about green or sustainable building, we need to look at the fundamentals. So what is the construction materials used? What are the systems in place? Because at the end of the day, when we talk about a green sustainable building, it's not about just constructing it today, but really looking at it in the future. How sustainable is it going to be in terms of the operation, and what's the quality it's going to bring to its end users, to its stakeholders? We should not be just looking at a sustainable building as an asset today, but really looking at it across its entire life cycle. So we bring in that concept of circular economy, looking at the materials being used, what happens to this building over a time period. So there are different components which adds in or brings value to this concept of a sustainable or green building.
Interesting. Now coming from the user side, Fariza?
Yeah, I think linking up to what Kabi says, I mean, there's a lot more existing buildings and new buildings as we build along, and there's a lot more vacant buildings, and therefore the key topic or the heated topic of staggered assets across built environment and real estate has become significantly more interesting, of which we vendors as well as consultants have to tackle. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kenneth, what do you think?
Well, I think there are two parts to it. The first part is in the design of the building, obviously, and the second part is how the building is operated throughout its lifespan. And being able to operate the building in a sustainable manner actually results in two things. The first is lower energy consumption. And the secondly is also, I think there has to be an impact on the tenants that live and that work in the building as well. And that could be potentially a change in mindset in terms of how they see sustainability. And at the same time, also in terms of being part of the larger picture of driving sustainability in their respective spaces. So really, it's not just about design, but it's also about operating it over the life cycle of the asset itself, which is typically very long for commercial buildings.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I just wanted to add to
Mm.
what Kenneth mentioned, which I thought was quite interesting, in that when we talk about a green or sustainable building, it's not about just looking at the carbon footprint during construction, but also looking at the operational carbon at a later stage during its life cycle. And I think that will link into our discussion in more detail.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that also helps see that there is a time when you do the build of the construction of the building. I think that's where Kabi will look at it more as a consultant. All right. But then there's also, after the building is constructed, then how do you maintain and sustain it? I think probably there'll be another part. So I think with it, I think a lot of us will be very interested to know, real life experience, right? We heard a lot of talks, we heard a lot of papers, but then what projects do we really go through? What useful experience have you been through? What pain have you endure, and what success have you go through, or failures have you had? I think a lot of the audiences will be very interested to hear from the speakers here. So it'll be interesting to share some story with us. So then how do you overcome them? What are the practical tips? What are the insights? All right. I think there will be something everybody, real experience, what people begin to share. I listen. Anybody like to start off with this first?
I'm happy to share an example, basically. So this is a project that was actually a project where we were given two goals. The first was to reduce the energy consumption, and it's an office environment, okay, with a bank. So they are the tenants of the building, and they don't actually own the physical building, but because they are single tenant, they control everything. So the goal was to reduce energy consumption, and at the same time, they wanted to improve the thermal comfort for occupants, because they had this problem with some areas being hot and cold. And because it's an existing site, we had to retrofit it. And the way in which we approached this was essentially to be able to have a proxy for thermal comfort. Temperature sensors were deployed where people were sitting down. Okay, so it was at human level. And we connected up the air conditioning system and the lighting system to the IoT solution. And then with all the data collected, we used that to dynamically, using machine learning program or AI program, regulate the operation of these M&E services on a demand basis. And the results of this were quite spectacular, actually. Lighting in an office environment, so it's an open plan office environment, we had around 22% savings from lighting. And air conditioning was more dramatic. There was a 40% energy savings altogether. And from a thermal comfort standpoint, we managed to take away the variation in thermal comfort. So even though set points were set at 25, some areas were as cold as 20 degrees Celsius. So using the machine learning or AI program and the data collected from the sensors, we were able to regulate the air conditioning system to the point where we had only a 1 degree Celsius difference. So setting at 25, either you get it around 24.5 or 25.5. So we were able to operate the cooling, the environment, to a much, much tighter band. And that's where the energy savings come from. So this is one example I thought I would just put out there. Yeah. And this is all based on data that is collected, and an AI program that determines when to intervene based on whether there's occupancy in a particular area or not.
I think that is a good example, Kenneth, and I might share an example, not on a commercial building, but on a retail shopping mall. So this is a shopping mall which operates, and you can imagine that during different times of the day, there's a lot of movement through the mall because it's connected to the MRT station. So what we actually did was, and the first important thing is mentioned by Ken, is data collection. So it's really capturing the data in terms of movement of pedestrians or people through the mall, from the MRT through the mall to the office buildings. We needed to understand what's the movement of that traffic through the mall. Because as you can imagine, the chiller plant starts to operate from a certain time in the morning. But do we really need it, all the plant equipment to operate at that stage? So that's the question. So once through, we collected the data, but we also don't want someone sitting there to press buttons to say, okay, you start operating the chiller plant now based on this amount of pedestrian movement or traffic through your mall area. So using AI, as mentioned by Kenneth, we were able to capture the data through, of course, a system of sensors, which has been strategically located, capture data, first review it, then use AI to start activating the different points in which the different plant equipment starts coming into operation. I think the important point here is not just about data collection, but it's also verifying that information which comes through. So we can implement AI, but I think it's also verifying it at different points to make sure that it synchronizes with the kind of information we are aiming to get. And I think that's really important in the world we are today, which we are capturing a lot of data, using sensors, using AI, but I think that verification needs to be in place as well.
Thank you. Marisa?
Yeah, I think I'll add up, but a little bit different from both Kevin and Kenneth would have said. I think the challenge, literally, if I were to throw a blanket over Singapore, is we have everything that we want to actually do digitalization and sustainability and IoT. We have good internet network. We have very good technology providers, such as Kenneth and the rest. And I think we have a lot of backup supports from the government as well. But what is the problem is our agenda of sustainability is that we don't conserve as much. So we have two approach where digitalization assists in, but the hard facts on buildings is that if we don't conserve, I would say that we can't really do much on the carbon side, of which Kabi did mention on the embodied carbon side. I think we need to work hand in hand with technology as well as the building structure together to actually stretch out the limits of sustainability. One often forget that we always have an oversight to what's the latest technology, but some of those frugal innovation, basic innovation, such as even monitorings, we tend to lack off. So judging from experience, we have to be mindful of that. Jonathan?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch you, Farisa. You're saying some basic thing that we didn't do it?
So some basics, like you have frugal innovation and you get the ones which are up on the top tier of innovation when it comes to digitalization. So frugal innovations are basic monitoring. There's often or not, to tell you honestly, it's still not there. So it's good to have all this monitoring sensors and AI, ML, but my biggest worry would be sometimes if we don't tread carefully, we might be able to miss a couple of steps, and at the end of the day, that entire sustainability or to sustain the platform and the person who actually would be equipped to do it is missing. And I'm talking from experience. So at the end of the day, the owner or the developer might just take a scissors and wipe up the whole thing just because they couldn't be able to understand where is this going, apart from people who understood the services very well. So we shouldn't forget that all the time, because it's still man-led in some ways for now. For now, it's still very much man-led, ML as well as AI. Both are still very much man-led. It's still very much infancy stages, although the technology and the platform is all there for us to use. Jonathan?
Yeah, actually, Jonathan, you asked about challenges, and Farizan spoke about people. Clearly, there is this challenge, and maybe just to share a bit on this particular project itself. So one of the technical challenges was that the duct layouts were different, okay, in different zones within the office. And the ducting is what carries the cool air to different people. Secondly, there were some areas which were exposed to afternoon sunlight. Okay, these were windows. And there was even a door that opens out to the external areas, because this was a ground floor office. And what that meant that the areas around where the doors and windows were always cool, warmer. And as a result, the operating set points were set such that these guys sitting near the windows were cool. But in the inside stack of the building, where they are away from the sunlight, that's where the temperature difference is. And there is also a draft that runs through the building whenever these doors are open. And that creates some kind of a natural cross ventilation, but it also means that certain areas become colder over time. So this is where AI comes into effect because it dynamically adjusts the operating set points based on the data that it gets from the temperature sensors. And that means that there is no need for any human intervention. Now, clearly, as Farizan pointed out, we also have to bring people along the way because there is a need to understand the challenges and how these systems work in order for people to trust it and not intervene. So one of the things we did was to turn off all ability for anyone to make set point changes. Okay, because when man and machine try to work together, it usually creates difficulties. That's the argument for fully autonomous vehicles, where they don't make irrational decisions. And this is very true because if you come from outside and you are warm, you are going to set your air conditioning set point to as low as possible. But you're not going to set it back when you're cool and you vacate that space or meeting room and someone comes in and then suddenly they feel very cold. So by taking out the ability to make adjustments to the operating set point, by disabling it from a software perspective, we found that the results were much, much better. So I just wanted to put that out and share that because when technology works, it should be quietly doing its work behind the scenes without the need for any human intervention.
Any further thoughts from Kavin, Fariza on this?
Yeah, I would just want to add, Jonathan, I think especially now, there's a big focus on operational carbon. So I think we have all the different technological platforms, different sensors, but end of the day, we also need to work with the stakeholders to understand what are their targets. Because end of the day, it's about also meeting these targets. What do we need to do to meet these targets, and what stage do we need to start implementing? So if we look at an existing asset, for instance, might not have all the smart technology, but at what stage do we need to start implementing or introducing different sensors or different data capturing methods for us to capture data to improve or upscale this existing building into a smart building or the more sustainable building? I think that's a challenge. At what stages? There's no point going to a client and telling the clients, hey, we need to strip out everything and install a whole new system. No, I think that's just going to be falling backwards. So we need to be looking ahead and looking at existing assets, looking at what sort of implementations could be progressively installed for them to meet such targets. And that's where we start looking at technology, levels of implementation, timing of these intervention. And also I keep mentioning about that validation of the data. I think that's very important.
I have something to share. I think one thing good about digitalization and IoT I noticed is that it's rather non-intrusive. That I really love about it. In a way, you can just kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but you can literally walk into any building and then do it just from the control point of view, versus if you were to do some lighting or chiller upgrades, which is very, very intrusive and requires a lot more money. So some of these are low-hanging fruits, are not that difficult to implement, but a level of understanding should be there. And then those are the small rewards, I should say, that you can actually reap over a period of time. Because the challenge, I think, in Singapore is when you have too much of an intrusive stuff, like changing of lights, chillers, and when you have tenants, when you have people operating, when you have shops which are operating, how do you expect them to just, have all that happening at the same time? They can't. So one thing I think I like about digital and IoT section is that you can actually onboard it as soon as you can, in actual fact.
Yeah, thanks. If I may add, though I'm moderator, I mean, I'm an IoT company myself. We actually deploy in one of the in a polytechnic, a very large, specifically Temasek Poly, 3,000 temperature sensor and humidity as well as motion sensor in every single room in the campus. So data is being pulled into the digital twins. And what the user want is it similar to what Kenneth mentioned, is they are able to see the ambient temperature and adjust the air condition accordingly. But because of the motion sensor, they also use it to collate the data with the room booking system. So if somebody book the room and aircon switch on, but nobody is there because of motion, then perhaps they can say, hey, who's the joker? Then they can get on and switch it off and so forth. So but what I see in all these things is, I think sensors and technology are there to collect data and do certain control. But however, certain things that I think the human factor on the workflow, the use case, when you switch on, when you off, where is the situation, sometimes I think every company, every organization is different. All right. So you can set very hard metrics to ensure you get X percentage of saving, but that could actually cause a lot of inconvenience or very uncomfortable feelings for among the end user as well. So that I think that, but the thing is really to everyone to do what they want. Of course, everybody will switch off the aircon very low and then it's freezing like anything, but it wastes a lot of time, wastes a lot of energy. So the balancing point on the human factor using technology is very crucial. And I think my sense is not many user, not many technology company is very familiar with that as a now. So we are still in the learning stage, all right? But the ability to collect data, the ability to control is there. But how do we do them? Is another leap forward? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Jonathan, just to add to that, earlier on I alluded to the fact that we have to take people along the journey as well, right? So for example, when lights go off in a cluster or a small zone, because there's no occupancy in there, in that particular area, the people in the surrounding area will immediately notice that it's a little bit darker because of the way how lighting is designed. But what we have done is to bring the user on the journey, whereby they understand why this is being done, and they have applications that allow them to see how much energy they've actually saved as a result of their participation. And this changes user behavior tremendously. It becomes a new normal where people expect that a particular area where no one is present shouldn't have the lights there in the first place. Now, of course, we have to take care of, there are situations where you have to take care, such as in walking corridors where you can't turn off those lights. And there has to be a general amount of lighting, or it can be quite scary in an enclosed office when you have like everything off except one area. So it's a user journey, and that's part of the whole process of helping them on their sustainability journey, to understand why they are doing it and how they are playing a part in the whole process.
And Kenneth, you have touched on a very interesting point. I think when you talk about this whole sustainability journey is really understanding your asset type, really understanding the operations, and then understanding the stakeholders. So when we talk about these journeys, we need to talk about understand the operations team, what are the challenges they are facing, then the stakeholders, and then the end users, the decision makers. Because along those points, everyone will have a key interest in what needs to be done. And by taking them through this journey, as rightfully mentioned, is very important. And that's when actually when you start having these sustainability frameworks for different organizations or different asset types, we look into that in more detail in terms of the operation of the assets, in terms of stakeholders, and then you start having these implementation plans which come into play, which I think is very important, because that mindset shift has to be there for this to progress.
I have something to add, which is throwing a spanner to the discussion a little bit. It's more to what needs to be done, or there are so many interest groups who are interested of what needs not to be done. So I'm putting a spanner there, but you have to be very mindful when you actually try to group people, because although it's something very clear and something beneficial, but everyone sees it different thing. I mean, if you talk about FM, sometimes we are here to help them a lot more. I'm sure everyone in the room do agree, but they don't necessarily see it like that, correct? Everybody do agree. They see it as some added work or added knowledge or added substance that they need to figure out. So I think we should be very mindful of that. I mean, human empathy is very, very important when we go with digitalization, because if we don't, then the success rate of doing it successfully is marginalized. So yeah, so the interest of people who are not interested for it to be done should also be taken care of at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's where the mindset shift comes into play, because progressively we are moving in that direction. It's going to happen. It's already happening. We're seeing changes in the environment, in the marketplace. So we need to bring, and rightfully pointed by Kenneth, we need to bring everyone on this journey.
So I want to share an example basically. So we had this is a real user. It was a lady who felt that for example, she asked the question, hey, I'm stepping away for a couple of minutes to get my printouts from the printer. Why is it that my lights go off? Okay, and I don't like it that it goes off and then when I come back it comes on, because I'm just stepping away to collect a piece of paper. And after a while, when we helped her understand the reasons why the real estate department was doing this, she said, okay, we understand I want to have energy savings, but can you extend the period of time for me? And this is where the appropriate use of technology comes in, because in this case, because everything is software defined, we say, okay, simple. How long do you think you need to step away before you agree that the light should turn off? She said, look, for me, can you give me 10 minutes? So we said, done, 10 minutes for you. But everyone else is 5 minutes, for example. So we have the ability to personalize down to an individual user's direction, because otherwise you throw the whole baby with the bathwater out. When everybody goes to 10 minutes because one says 10 minutes. So each zone can be operated independently with slightly different operating parameters to serve the needs and to cater the needs of specific groups of people. Now, temperature and air conditioning is exactly the same issue as well. Some people have warmer body temperatures. They just prefer it to be colder. Or slightly, they want to have the feeling of breeze on their face. Right? Asians like to have drafts. Europeans don't like to have drafts. And so by being able to personalize these systems down to the point where we can cater to individuals, actually helps to take away a lot of the objections that people actually have, because they feel that they can provide this feedback and there's a certain amount of personalization in terms of how they're working. And this has worked well because it solved the fights over, it's too cold in this area and another person wants it to be a bit warmer. And so with AI, we can set these operating parameters and we've helped customers to address these needs. And so basically it's a win-win-win. The business lowers their carbon footprint, lowers their energy bill, and the employees feel that the company is taking care of them and taking their feedback in. And so you have a symbiotic relationship where everybody is going on the journey, sustainability journey, without feeling that someone's trying to, switch off the lights just to save some money.
Thanks. If I may just give a comment on that. I think for smaller area with very high end user, you might like to do that. But in a very big area whereby there's too many users, you probably need a give and take. Whereby you cannot probably one scheme to cover the entire area, because it'd be hard to maintain for individual user. But of course, for specific high end user, that's an excellent system. Yeah. Can I move on? Since we have about 10 minutes left, let's look at the future. All right. I think we all agree that IoT technology is evolving, and sustainable and green building is also still evolving. evolving in the sense that people recognize it's important, but how to do it, I think it's not a universal truth. All right. And also the objective for it. So looking up ahead, all right, what do you then see as will be needed, all right, to increase green and sustainable building using IoT? So you like to share in terms of, let's say, interdependency of design, from a building owner, from a tenant standpoint, consultant standpoint, how do we achieve this? What will be the new trends? What are the new technology that might be available soon, or still infant stage? How can we improve? Of that, do you think there's anything that in the regulator field that we can that can set in store that can help, or maybe the Singapore Green Building Council, if there's anything that can actually motivate the market, all right, to educate the users, all right, towards greater sustainability? All right, so anybody like to share on this? Looking ahead, what will be the trends? Or what will be your wish list?
I might start, Jonathan, because I think that we've been talking quite a bit about energy consumption. So probably let Kenneth and Faizan to talk about that. But from a materials point of view, I mean, we're talking about sustainable buildings, we're talking about green buildings. I would think one of the greatest areas to also focus on is IoT sensors to look at the performance of these materials. Because there's a lot of green materials being introduced in the market. But how efficient are these green materials? We're talking about new glazing, we're talking about internal finishing, we're talking about, roof panels, which help to reduce the amount of heat transfer, heat gain kind of thing. By using IoT sensors, by capturing the data, we'll be able to validate the information and then start looking at, are these materials being introduced really green, sustainable? How can they assist in the long-term development in our design? So I think there's the energy part, but I also think there's a huge part which is missing on the materials which is being installed. Of course, there's a lot of calculations we can do in regards to checking the embodied carbon of these materials, but once installed, how do we monitor the performance of these materials? I think that's one area which I would really like to focus on, moving forward on the industry to collaborate more to look into that.
So Kabi, it's not easy, and we were involved in the SLE, super low energy building project, where they wanted to evaluate the effect of roof paints on indoor temperature, and the effect of glass coatings, and how well they worked, as well as how long it would last, how long this effect would last. I think the biggest challenge really is how do we measure this?
Yep.
Do we use, for example, if you're doing glass coating, you measure and baseline it again for an area with and without the coating, knowing that the sun moves, and you get different parts of the building that get shaded from time to time. So there's a lot of these challenges in terms of setting up an apples to apples comparison. And my suggestion would be to maybe do this in a controlled lab environment, okay, whereby you can actually evaluate these technologies by itself. Because when you put them out into a physical building itself, you're subject to many other variables, occupancy loads, weather for that day, and you need to take a very, very long period of time before you can draw any conclusions of it. And roof paints have been around for a long time, and it's really not easy to quantify that impact. But I believe they work, because if you look at our cars today, everybody has a solar film attached to it. And you can feel the difference when you have solar film. But to be able to quantify how much energy that actually saves, is probably a lab function to a large extent.
Yeah, exactly my point, Kenneth. I think the key point I was trying to make here was also that we need to capture the data now on existing buildings, new buildings which were designed for, because then in 10, 20 years time, we can have this discussion because there's a lot of data being captured. And we can refer back to that data to reflect back on, what should be done, what we could start considering. I think those are some of the things we need to consider. Like you have all these sensors installed in new buildings, we can use those existing sensors to potentially capture more information or more data without having to install more sensors, for the sake of just capturing data.
I mean, you're very forward-looking, but not everybody actually thinks that we basically can wait 20 years to analyze the data, and that's one of the primary challenges as well. And the second part here is really the metadata, because no two buildings are the same. So how do you derive conclusions? from a data set that you deploy from a single building, and how do you conclude from that and then use that in the next design? Maybe that's your area of expertise, really. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to discuss further.
Fariza?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's very true. I have a building that I know that have too much data, but the person doesn't know how to give instructions to separate the data. There's also a pain. So data is good when you know what to use it. Data is not really good when you don't know how to use it. So it's just a bundle of numbers, you know. So it's all fine and well, but I think we need that. The other thing that I like to lengthen onto what Kenneth would say is there are a few things when it comes to energy savings. Energy savings quantified against baseline, energy savings that influence thermal comfort. So cool paint as well as the film on the glass, it actually is more of a user thing. You feel comfortable, you don't drop the temperature. So that was what it means. It wasn't actually meant to be a direct quantification of energy savings. So the part I'm going to tell you here is that the understanding beyond that is very important, just the basis of understanding. If you don't understand the concept, what you're doing very, very well, then you get very much led by the fact that there's an energy savings on a cool paint, there's an energy savings on a film or whatnot. But it's actually the film or the paint actually influences our behavior, not to get the button and then press it down to 18 degrees because the paint makes us feel comfortable, not necessarily energy savings. So I guess that basing on experience, there's a lot more to share with everyone in Singapore. Yeah, I think that's what I can actually give advice on.
Thank you. I think we more or less come and address most of the questions. Does anybody want to raise any other points?
Maybe just one thing, which is we have to demystify this whole technology and in the tech industry. There's a lot of buzzwords, big data, IoT, AI, ML. I think we have to demystify it and really help the customer to use and adapt it, deploy it, feel it, and not just deploy technology for the sake of technology, but actually to help them to have an outcome. So it should be an outcome-focused deployment project versus just putting in sensors for the sake of putting it in. And I think that's the strategy that we've seen yield results, because many projects expand after the initial pilot phase is put in. And the primary reason for that is because they get to see the benefits, they get to experience a better, lower energy consumption, better thermal comfort. And I think that's the key thing that the industry needs to do, to be able to go out there and to share these success stories rather than talk about the technology itself. Yeah.
Thanks. Maybe I also add in one more thing. Regard to sensors, I think of recent times there's a lot of interest in the indoor air quality and carbon dioxide level. Sensors like this have been there for a long time, but I think because of COVID and the interest from Europe, I think a lot of people is beginning to see, the air as people come back to the office, they want is the air of the right sufficient indoor air quality, is the carbon dioxide level low enough, is there refresh of the oxygen and so forth. So I think sensors like this in the IoT space actually does help to monitor and also to help regulate. Of course, that will actually means that if let's say I do check on this, some of the buildings, and we put CO2 sensors. Quite a number of office buildings, I see that in early in the morning, CO2 level is very low, 500. Wow. At the end of the day, it's 1,002 when there's a lot of people. So that means that the air conditioning is not well regulating the carbon dioxide. So of course, if you can pipe that into the HVAC system and do a more frequent refresh of oxygen, then that's actually good for the health of the end user. But of course, that will mean additional energy is being spent because you are making the aircon work harder. So we will spend more energy, but it is good for the wellness of the people in the building. Yeah. So things are that. So in other words, I think in the green building, it is not a one-size-fits-all thing. So you need to look at every matrices and every users and every point, and then design accordingly. Yeah.
Yeah, just one last statement. Technology should not just be a solution. Yeah, there's a lot more.
All right. So in the final conclusion, one final word from everyone. What you'd like to say to advice to the audience here for green building?
Horizon, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to be mindful. Too fast is a problem, too slow is a problem. So, you know, if you move too fast, people will not be able to understand and catch up and therefore sustain the positive effect. But when you're too slow, you're also laggard. So be very mindful about each and every building and its own context and its building function is completely different. You can't say, my left neighbor does it, so I'm going to do it myself. So I think it's a very important space to be in. So that's what I can have some words to leave.
Thank you. Kenneth, yeah, last word.
Yeah, for me, it's start with the end in mind. That's how we work with our customers. Be clear about your goals and objectives. And then from there, work forward to what type of sensing is required in order to address and to achieve the outcome. So instead of just putting stuff in, our approach is to start with the end goal in mind.
Thank you. Kabi?
I was just going to say, you know, technology is not a one-fit-all solution. I think we need to consider social values, economic benefits, and of course the environment. And we need to consider these three factors together with technology to create a more sustainable, greener environment.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in this IoT track here on the green and sustainable building. So I hope you all enjoy yourself and learn a lot from the distinguished speaker here. So thank you so much.